Thank you very much, Daniela, and thank you all for coming to this presentation. And indeed, yes, this presentation is about two articles, one already published this year in Politics and Governance, and the other forthcoming in International Migration. I see two of my co-authors here, Rainer Baubock and Claudia Wenschneider. They call for the first article, which is kind of global comparison, both empirically and empirical and normative discussion on a special representation of no resident citizens. And we base on three dimensions that I'm going to explain later. And then I'm going to delve into another paper that, as I told, is already published in Politics and Governance. Why do not resident citizens get elected? Basically, filling the gap or partially filling the gap of descriptive representation associated with this provision of a special representation. So to start this presentation, I'm going to rely on indicating the main fact of a special representation of no resident citizens. Currently, we have around 16 provisions of no resident citizen special representation worldwide, sparse in each continent except for Asia, with a couple of historical cases of only enactment but not implementation, such as Angola, or enactment and short implementation, such as Guinea-Bissau or Morocco. This type of representation, of course, is really niche as compared to other political transnational practices. So despite its limited scope, there are several contributions, both empirical and normative, that we can mention here. Empirical research has examined the enactment, regulation, and/or application of this policy, either by employing case studies or case study designs, and only one article besides of ours do a global comparison. I'm talking about Michael Collier article in Political Geography that I think this audience know really well. In most external voting rights studies, of course, this type of discrete representation has been operationalized as an explanatory variable or as an element of the research design. In parallel, normative research has intensively debated whether no resident citizens special representation is suitable according to democratic values. And of course, the first component of this presentation is about associating a special representation with the stakeholder principle that Rainer here theorized in 2007. But yeah, important question were or still are unanswered or under study. So this is a great opportunity to expand a little bit the research on the topic, and maybe some of you are going to research the missing links of a special representation. Who knows? So a special representation of no-resident citizens in a nutshell is neither a new electoral instrument nor it is specific to no-resident citizens. Andrew Reynolds, for instance, in his article published in 2005, provides a global overview of different electoral mechanisms that ensure the representation of not only migrants, but also ethnic, racial, national, religious communities. So this is the first point to define what is and what is not a special representation. this type of discrete representation has been long adopted by national legislators since the 70s, beginning with Portugal, the pioneer case, and only Mexico that has adopted and implement this provision at the subnational level. This, of course, is under study because probably we rely largely on the pattern, the normal pattern that study non-resident citizens in within national level context. But yeah, there is a subnational case of a special representation. Then a special representation of no-resident citizens has been enacted either simultaneously with external voting rights, such as in the Portuguese or Croat case, or thereafter, such as in Colombia or in Peru. In Colombia, for instance, they were adopting and implementing external voting rights in presidential elections since the 70s or the 60s. And then in 2002, they implement a special representation. So you have a lag of 40 years. As the following table or this table shows, the implementation of legislation introducing a special representation has been unbalanced across countries. We enlist all the countries that adopt and implement no-resident citizens, desegregating, of course, for adoption for the year of adoption and the year of first implementation. And we, in the description of the table, we also include the seats. So, for instance, Croatia, Italy, and France that suffers a couple of variation over time. We enlist also this, these exceptionalities. In most countries, the institutional provisions of no-resident citizen special representation has remained unchanged since the initial adoption. So, and probably the most interesting for you on this paper is the 3 dimensions that we recognize as relevant in the special representation discussions. Eligibility, meaning who is eligible to vote and stand as a candidate in no-resident citizen special representation designs. The second one would be constituency arrangements or the institutional design behind extraterritorial districts. And the third one, electoral proportionality or the comparison between the share of the vote for extraterritorial voters in parliament and their share in the total electorate. So we basically start with a normative discussion, as I mentioned, relying on the stakeholder principle to do so, but of course, debating or talking around with other principles associated with democratic values or democratic theory to make our argument, and then we also test these 3 dimensions empirically. So this is the first part, the normative grounding. So in terms of eligibility, no-resident citizens are associated with group rights. But of course, in the total normative grounding, they can be associated with territorial representation too. We rely on the stakeholder principle, as I told, which was theorized by Rainer Babok in 2007 to talk about external voting rights and citizenship to now evaluate a special representation of no-resident citizens. This principle suggests that citizens living abroad permanently should be enfranchised only if they can be assumed to share with all citizens an interest in the common good. General representation and assimilate voting should therefore be the default mode of no-resident citizen representation. So, in other words, we don't find that the group right perspective offers a convincing justification for a special representation. Of course, this doesn't imply that a special interest of no-resident citizens should never count for their electoral inclusion. Continuing with constituency arrangement, and this is the part that territorial representation fit well because territorial and representation of electoral district are feature of many electoral systems, not only on the provision of a special representation of non-resident citizens, is another possible justification. Extraterritorial, or also called overseas districts or overseas constituencies for non-resident citizens, seems to fit this logic in many ways. On the stakeholder account, however, neither the special interest of non-resident citizens nor the fact that they are citizens suffice. What matters is the strength of their ties to their origin country, the issues of who should be aware citizenship and voting rights outside of a state jurisdiction are thus contested. The stakeholder principle, in this case, provides an answer to these concerns by justifying the inclusion of non-resident citizens if they can be assumed to share with domestic voters a sufficiently strong or sufficiently enough interest in the future of the policy. The choice between single or multiple extraterritorial constituencies is more contextual and less exposed to normative critique, applying one of the contributions author that is Harrock, Democratic Reasons Why Territorial Subdivision Promote Democratic Values. We agree that multiple districts can balance out democratic distortions of geographical representation and introduce greater the diversity of interest and perspective among the special representative, undermining the problematic notion of a homogeneous national diaspora. In terms of proportionality, we enlist a set of scenarios where no resident citizen special representation might be the preferred option. Where, for instance, the share of no resident citizen is the total electorate is that is very large, where there is a risk that the voting system could be or will be manipulated to mobilize an extraterritorial electorate, and where there is thus a danger that the external vote might not only tip the balance, but also structurally dominate the domestic vote, as for instance in Italy in terms of external voting rights more generally in 2006. We also talk about the containment effect or the containment strategy of some origin country authorities. A special representation has the effect of underrepresenting non-resident citizens compared to resident citizens. So this suggests that legislators choose a special over assimilate representation less because they want to strengthen the influence of the no-resident citizenry, but because they want to represent them while also containing their influence. So Probably this can be associated with an utilitarian, more utilitarian approach than than others. Changing a little bit the dimensions and the evaluation, of course, to an empirical evaluation of a no-resident citizen special representation, we need to say that it's shaped to a large extent by the eligibility conditions for voting for or becoming a special representative. Voters for special representation seats or candidates running for such seats are usually not required to be first-generation immigrants. That's why we prefer to refer to a special representation of no-resident citizens instead of a special representation of immigrant. So we include descendants of immigrants that are also in several cases include for this provision. Mapping the constituency arrangement, we find that cases of special representation are divided nearly equally between those where all no-resident citizens form a single or global extraterritorial constituency, and those where they are subdivided into two or more geographical regions. The first is the single district, and the second line, the second road, sorry, is the multiple district. In the latter category, the subdivision or the division of constituencies varies between a two-district setting, for instance, Portugal or Ecuador, to more than 5 extraterritorial districts, such as in Senegal or Tunisia. The country group with a single overseas district only in the lower chamber includes the second largest number of cases over time and is geographically more diverse one. Currently, the average number of overseas district and seats is around 3 and 7 respectively. Changing to electoral proportionality, and perhaps this is more important, more relevant to link with, for instance, the next presentation or discussions with electoral engineering and party politics, is electoral proportionality. By comparing with the share of registered voters living abroad as part of the total electorate, we can calculate or estimate the proportionality. Positive differences indicate overrepresentation of external citizens compared to domestic ones. For instance, the case of the case of Romania, Tunisia, Niger, Ecuador, North Macedonia, Senegal, and so on. And while negative differences indicate underrepresentation. So basically the work average and most cases are on underrepresentation. So for those that refer to the special representation of citizens living abroad as a symbolic practice, they are quite right in terms of electoral proportionality. Should be noted that our measure is limited to descriptive representation and does not address whether overseas voters are substantially represented. For this, please check the article by Pablo Garcia in Comparative Migration Studies. Coming to the other component of this presentation, and I think for the time's sake, I'm going to be very brief in this part. Well, as I mentioned also during this presentation, scholars has descriptively explored no-resident citizens' special representation and its impacts on a special authority and national level substantive representation, often as a containment strategy. Yet there was no systematic evaluation of the role of descriptive representation with regard to citizens living abroad when they compete for extraterritorial seats. Our main argument with my co-author this time, Patricio Navia, was that institutional and partisan variable affect the electoral success of no-resident citizens candidates in legislative districts created to represent no-resident citizens. Not replicating the domestic arena of competition, of course, but adapting to the extent to which migration, geographical distance, and transnational policies, for instance, influence individuals and institutions. So for the time's sake, I'm not going to talk about the electoral engineering and party politics, literatures, and how they relate to the special representation of no-resident citizens. If you want to know more, please check my article. Probably there is a really summarize a brief explanation of how they mix together. But yeah, basically, I will focus more on the empirical component on this paper than the theoretical side. So we posit this four hypotheses, one related to incumbency position, one related to ballot position in the or ballot order in the electoral system, and party affiliation, and this is also bringing some contribution that takes, for instance, the gratitude model of external voting rights as Turku and Urbach to migration studies. And finally, the ideology or the party ideology on migrant issues that is quite explored in the literature on migrant outreach and in generally parties or political parties abroad. As I anticipate, we explore four hypotheses using Ecuador as a case study, not only because it is an influential case in terms of migrant electoral rights, as probably we all know, but also because of its overrepresentation, as we saw before in the table of electoral proportionality. We build an electoral aggregate dataset based on the official information provided by the National Electoral Council in Ecuador and secondary sources to complement this dataset with socio-demographic controls of all the no-resident candidates since the first election in which Ecuadorian abroad could vote for legislative elections. So we use two indicators to measure our dependent variable, our Y, candidate electoral success of no-resident citizens. Basically, first we include the cotamous indicator for whether the candidate won the seat or not. And then we use the vote share of each candidate. This is technically speaking measured with a logic regression, a logistic regression. The first indicator and the second indicator is measured with a log linear regression. We control, of course, with fixed effects, both sets of regressions. The independent variables are very related to our hypothesis. We measure incumbency advantage, or if the candidate is an assembly member currently representing the same seat in the electoral competition. And then the prior legislative experience in any type of legislative elections at the national level. Second, we measure ballot position. That is a simple variable that reflects which candidate is first ranked on the list, as each electoral district in Ecuador is fixed and has 2 seats in dispute for each election. Third, we use 2 indicators for party affiliation. First, if the candidate is affiliated to the party that won the presidency, and then mixing with the gratitude model if the party is pro-enfranchisement or not. And finally, following our paper together with Reyes Dandua, published recently in Representation, about the strategic entry of Ecuadorian parties in extraterritorial district. We incorporate party ideology and issue silency. So, results. I bring only one set of regressions, but basically both sets of regressions, both the log linear regressions, but also the binary logistic regressions show quite the same results. We found evidence to support our 4 hypotheses, except for ballot position, the factor that most explain why no resident candidates get elected in Ecuadorian extraterritorial districts stem from incumbency position and party affiliation. Most of the 30 elect candidacy observations has been affiliated with the political organization led by the former President Rafael Correa during Lenin Moreno, another president administration. The party that was founded by Rafael Correa but stole by his successor Lenin Moreno, Alianza País split into 2 opposing forces: those who stay in the party and those who realign with Correa in the new political movement, citizen revolution, being associated with the party has had a positive effect on the electoral success. So basically, all candidate elect twice or 3 times has belonged to this party because it's pro-enfranchise and also was in the power. Then we can also observe other results, but probably for the time's sake, because I think this presentation was already half an hour, so I'm going to conclude here, but you can observe a little bit the results that I bring. Basically, as I said, all the hypotheses are supported except for ballot position, and this is probably interest because it's not what the typical study of electoral politics, at least in Latin America, would suggest to have that left, for instance, left wing or left leaning ideology, as well as migrant related issues, a party that defend or is explicitly interested in migrant related issues is quite related to the electoral success of no residence candidates, which is quite not surprisingly in the European literature.